Is is this a replay from last month?
Could be.
Are we live or is this a replay, Charlie? I'm not sure. I haven't seen you. We have not been on this thing together for a long time.
Yeah, we've been. Well, we have been on different missions, but it's good to see you, my brother. Hope everything is going okay for you. And you know,
Well, it's going okay. It was a pretty crazy week. I think most of you guys know. My wife is actually just jumped on the feed. It is working on Facebook tonight. I apologize again for last week's technical difficulties. I do want to thank Dr. Kaohi Manu Akiona and Dr. Miskovich, Dr. Tim Brown. Uh,
uh,
Kaohi hosted Tim Brown, and the feed for some reason didn't go to Facebook. So I did a replay that night later on. We were in a location that I couldn't get any service. So, but I'm glad to see you, man. I think I'm glad to see look at this, man. Just to honor our village, I wore my shirt.
mhm.
Um, yeah, the stand-ins. Cynthia says the stand-ins were great. Yeah, I appreciate much appreciation to those people for filling in while we were out. Um, but yeah, we had a rough week, man. I think most of you know my dad tested positive less than a week after he got home from the hospital from his heart situation, his mild heart attack.
Mhm.
Um, and others in his household now have tested positive. So, I bring that up not for any sympathy or anything like that. I bring it up to raise awareness, Charlie. What
Mm.
is we have been pounding this drum for a very long time. And, we have had expert after expert after expert. And you know this all too well, Charlie. You were the first to get the personal impact of COVID with your brother. I mean, you started this journey really sharing your brother's story. And I think as I read posts, as I read people, I went the other day. I posted that no waste your time posting shit on my page because you're gonna get blocked. Period. Our page, Charlie. This show is intended to inform and educate. That's it. We're not here to debate. We're not here to argue. We're not here to do anything else other than to inform and educate. And some people have a hard time with that.
Mhm.
And we have, last week, not even last week, Saturday, we lost a sister, a very good friend of ours. Their family lost a mom. 1 week prior, they lost a grandma to COVID. This is on Kauai, people. This is not in Iowa, Idaho, Florida. No, this is on Kauai. They lost two. They lost a mom and a grandma in the same week. And I still see people trying to convince our viewers, our village, that this is fake, that this is not true. It's hype. It's conspiracy. It's people getting their pockets padded. Now, when my dad tested positive, my dad is not well. He's sick. And he'll be on if he's not on already. He said he was going to be on. Probably pop on at 7 o'clock. I'll be very happy. We planned this trip, and I know a lot of people going to complain. Yeah, Mel, you the one, you blah blah, but you guys had traveled. Well, listen, we traveled because there's my pops. He's on. What's up, Dad? So we planned this trip to come spend some time with the kids, and we do it safely. And then on Thursday we're gonna go to Seattle to go visit my dad. We're gonna surprise my dad with the kids for Christmas and spend Thursday through Monday with my dad. And then he gets COVID, and we obviously had to cancel that leg of the trip because we're not gonna take any chances. My point is that maybe some of these people gotta hit home. And I hate to say that, but I think that only then people can realize the danger of this virus. And I keep seeing people, yes, people, if you can shoot the prayers over to my dad and his family up here, up in Seattle. Until you're touched by this thing, it's so easy to go out there and tell people we got to learn to live with it. COVID is here to stay. We'll learn to live with it, and it's frustrating. So my tone has changed. It's really, I don't have time for you if you're gonna come on to try to uh, prove Uncle Charlie and me and Dr. Dworkin and Dr. Miskovich and Dr. Miller, Dworkin Miller and Dr. Dworkin and Dr. Tim Brown. And if you're going to try to come on my page or our show to disprove them, then you're gone. Plain and simple. I don't have time, Charlie. I don't mind having an informed, educated discussion. But when you come in on and spewing garbage, you just haven't been touched yet by the COVID. So anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way because tonight we got a unbelievable guest, and um, I can only imagine what he's going to talk about because everything he predicted in this book right here. This book was the roadmap. This is how we screwed up with Delta and COVID. The roadmap is right here, and they choose not to listen. But Dr. Dworkin is on tonight, and I cannot wait. So anyway,
Mhm.
peace out.
Well, you said it. You said it. But I think I know who you're talking about. But as we say, leave it in God's hands. But the key thing about the show is, yes, we want to provide the information because we know we cannot convince everyone. But at least if we were to go home to our Lord with our Lord today, at least I know I tried. Right? That's all you can do. That's all you can do. That's the best anyone can do. I cannot spoon feed any of our family from that's in this village with us. But at the same token, I am not. We don't do things like a Jim Jones. That's not it. What you see is what you get, and what the guests speak of. We do our homework. We do our homework. But I think this individual that you may have been referring to, I think he really has to search deep down inside. First of all, when don't embarrass yourself by running for office because the votes was just too wide. Couldn't make up the gap from the very first printout. So you shouldn't be talking.
Yeah. Well, you can see why. And I don't know if you guys. I mean, if you saw the post, I think you know who Charlie's talking about. I'm not even gonna give that guy the recognition that he doesn't deserve. But
Yep.
yeah, it is
But
what it is. And I just I see some posts over here, and listen, I don't take any offense to any comment. Mel, your choice to fly is terrifying. I think we talked about this a lot. In fact, if not for my dad's heart attack, we would not have come up. I was going to cancel the whole thing and postpone it, but I don't think you guys, many of you, don't understand our situation, and it is what it is. And yeah, I take no offense though, and I respect the opinions. I'm just saying that
Mhm.
it was a tough decision to fly up. It was one that we had talked about, and it was one that we had made, knowing full well that we were going to be safe. And in fact, going home, we're not. We're going to test out. We're going to test before we leave, and we're going to test when we get home, and we're going to test days after we arrive. So I can assure you that we will take the necessary precautions to be safe. And
Hey,
that's the
but
best I can do. That's the best I can do, man.
but I would like to say this before we bring our guests on. All we have to do is take a look at what the numbers held in just a little over 2 days. These numbers are quite revealing. Okay, it is quite revealing. It kind of tells us um, how this wave is going to come. And I had a post earlier because everything that we do to keep our island safe, it takes a coordinated effort, and it starts at the top, and it comes down it trickles down all the way to us. Okay, that is I cannot see, I cannot fathom the thought to think that now some of our top officials are kind of worried. I mean, what do you expect? It's like a forest fire. If you don't attempt to cut a fire break or put out the damn fire, and the fire decides to jump from one valley to the next and burn everything in its path, what do you think was going to happen or was not going to happen? Okay. So the thing is, I get very, very annoyed with the fact that when we had what we had at the airports when we first started this whole journey, right? It was proven. We had the mayor of Kauai had proven that if you have a procedure in place, the numbers were well controlled, right? Right now, on a stack of Bibles, you cannot tell any of us where the spread is occurring. It's too far gone. And that is the problem. I've said that all along, right? It's like when you get in a ring and you box, and if your opponent is giving you a couple good jabs, your objective is, hey, no retreat all the time. Just block them in the corner, right? So you can deliver some insights. But that's not what's happening. We're not even making a dent to try to attempt to say, okay, we've got over 1,000 cases in Hawaii right now. At least try to make a dent and try to stop any more from coming in. We're not even doing that. And that is what's frustrating. Okay.
Yeah.
And I see those, you know, I am not going to bash any travelers coming to Hawaii because they deserve it. They deserve to travel too. But sometimes I tell myself, but why now? And maybe for some reason they have to. I don't know. So that's why I don't want to get into it about that. But at least make sure they're safe so the rest of us that's planted here in Hawaii, we stay safe. You know, that's that's the
and
thing
and,
that
and I think
makes me so
and I
frustrated. That
think
is frustrated, but yeah.
and I think that is why we have been professing forever. We're begging, pleading to have the state reinstitute the pre and post travel testing. Because you're not going to stop people from traveling, and we've always said you can do it safely, and the best way to do it is with testing. Anyway, tonight, guys, Dr. Dwrokin, The Plague Doctors. My book came just in time for me to bring it on the plane. And I know I explained this earlier, Doc, before you came on, that this is the roadmap. This is the guidebook that we should be using, how not to repeat the errors that we did in the initial stages of COVID. And in case you guys don't believe me, there we go. Jonathan Dwrokin. You see the MD? MD. That means medical doctor. He's an infectious disease specialist. He knows what the heck he's
No,
talking about.
MD means mighty dynamic.
Yeah,
We've
that
got a
too.
very mighty dynamic person on with us tonight.
The
Yep.
reason I bring that up is because we oftentimes get criticized for not bringing on experts. Well, I don't think we brought on any non-expert, but Dr. Dwrokin is here. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dwrokin because I'm sure he has a lot to say. How you doing, my man?
Good, good. It's nice to be back, guys. Thanks, and I appreciate that boxing metaphor, Charlie, at the beginning. I think that's where that's where we're at.
Yep.
The funny thing about experts is, we have to be modest because I was just talking with some of my colleagues about this before I came on. This is a very humbling pandemic, and
Mhm.
nobody's been right about everything, and nobody has a crystal ball and is able to predict with perfect accuracy what's going to happen next. And that's why it's really important to have some humility as we move forward one step at a time and to reassess and see where we're getting. And if something's not working, to be able to adjust course a little bit. And one of the qualities that I've noticed in propagandists on both sides of this is an unwillingness to do this. Is their ego is so invested in whatever their thing is, if it's hydroxychloroquine or whatever it was, that they don't shift, right? And then they get mad when people call them out on it, and they present themselves as victims of various types, and that's a surefire sign that that's a no good expert, because I think the only thing that I'm an expert on is dancing around the ring with this thing at this point. I'm on round 5 now here on the Big Island, and we're not done yet, unfortunately.
So Omicron is here. I think a lot of you put up a chart a while back, and I think everything that you have talked about has really uh, turned out to be true, as with many others. Maybe you can start by giving us an overview of. I know you're on the Big Island, but I don't hear any Kokies tonight. I'm not sure why.
They out there, the windows are closed because it's cold.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, so maybe start with an overview and what has happened in the last few days and what we can expect moving forward.
Sure. Yeah. I updated my chart on when I was last on the show. I think I put up a real, or you guys put up, thankfully, a real simple chart correlating, vaccination rates and death rates. And this wasn't my idea. I pinched the idea from some other people, but these have been going around a little bit. I think there was a biologist at the Rockefeller Center who created this, and I've been updating it every couple of weeks since, because one of the questions I've been having is, as we get emergence of new variants, are we going to see a dissociation between vaccination status and death, right? And with Omicron in particular, that's a concern, right? We had all those early reports of decrease in vaccine efficacy, and that ought to sound familiar because we had the same fear when Delta happened, right? But as I was updating the graph, if anything, the correlation looked even tighter. And the places, this is as of December 15th, that were the highest vaccinated, are still having much lower overall death and mortality compared to the places that are lower vaccinated. And there's a lot of variability around it, depending on what's going on locally. Obviously, there are other factors that matter in terms of who dies and who doesn't. But I still think that fundamental formula has not been shifted by this. So we're dealing with a new variant. There's definitely more vaccine escape. We can get into that. There's going to be more breakthrough infections. There already are. We can get into that. But the fundamental recipe is not that much different than when I was here last time. And we talked about, what things work and what things don't work. And, one of the things that works is lowering transmission by various mechanisms, avoiding large indoor crowd gathering in unventilated spaces, early testing, getting people into treatment before they're hospitalized, wearing masks that fit well, and vaccination. And those things are all still apropos. That the virus has not become a completely different, creature. It's a different variant, but we're not seeing a fundamental shift in any of those things.
All right. Well, a lot of people, and I'm not sure if it's still too soon to tell, but a lot of people are saying this is just like a minor cold, this Omicron. There's a lot of hype, and we know that the transmissibility is much higher. We know that people are getting sick. We know there's a lot of breakthrough with Omicron, and we know that Omicron is now slowly becoming the dominant strain. But what do you say to those people that are still trying to tell us that it's a cold, it's a flu, we're creating a hype over nothing? What would you say?
Yeah, you got to be very, very self-confident to try to predict the future of a variant that's just arriving and is now infecting about 1,000 people a day in the state. I'm not that self-confident. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out. There are some differences between Omicron and the other variants, and I've been trying to track these closely as I was with Delta. Well, maybe we should talk about it a little bit. One of my bigger fears as a clinical infectious disease doctor, and I think this hasn't really gotten as much attention, is the potential loss of treatment options. So one big difference between Omicron and Delta is that with Delta, we had really effective monoclonal antibodies. So if we could diagnose people early in the course of their illness and get them into these infusion centers that we were setting up, we could reduce their risk of hospitalization and death. And although Delta was a really nasty virus, what we saw was continued success amongst healthcare in lowering the mortality rate, and a big part of that was because we had these early treatments available. Well, the major monoclonal antibody that I was using was this Regeneron cocktail, and we were using it all through the Big Island, including in rural environments. and we jury rigged infusion clinics to get people in, and it was one of the things that kind of saved our butts during the Delta wave. That doesn't work on Omicron. There's neutralization studies out where they look at the effect of that Regeneron cocktail, and it doesn't work. So our options are a lot more limited now. And one of the monoclonals that does work is this drug called sotrovimab, but there's like a rush on it, and it's hard to get, and we don't have access to it, at least not at the moment. It's one of the many daily conversations I'm having with the healthcare leadership is, get me some sotrovimab, please, so that we can get our monoclonal clinic up and running for Omicron. There's a new drug that is about to go through the FDA emergency use process called Paxlovid, which looks like it may work. It's a protease inhibitor. So for people who are familiar with the HIV world, they've heard of protease inhibitors before. It looks like it's effective, but it hasn't gotten authorized yet, and it's not available yet. So one of my concerns is we're about to get hit with another wave, and I don't have like any good antivirals, at least not at the moment. And from my perspective, this is a really excellent reason to delay the onset of this wave. And Darigo Carroll and I double teamed to write an op-ed a few weeks ago in the Star Advertiser, and that was a big part of the impetus. We knew we were going to get cases sooner or later, but later is better than sooner because it gives us a chance to stand up this healthcare infrastructure that can keep people out of the hospital. So that's one of my big concerns. You guys asked a little bit about severity. It's a tricky question, and I think it's a little too soon to say for sure. In South Africa, there does appear to be a dissociation between case counts and deaths. So they track you can through their government websites cases each day, and you can look at deaths, and you can look at things like hospitalizations, and you can look at things like who's requiring a ventilator. And as early as a week or two ago, there was this observation that the case counts were growing super fast, but severe illness in the hospitals was not growing as fast, and deaths have remained relatively flat. Does that mean that the virus is more mild? Not necessarily. There's lots of reasons why that could happen. Some of the early cases were occurring in universities around Johannesburg. It was an unusually young mix of people. We know that young people generally have more mild illness. South Africa's population is a lot different than the United States population. It's a much younger population. They're less vaccinated. There's a lot more HIV. They had their own variant there earlier in the pandemic, the beta variant, which may have provided some partial protection. So it's a little hard to interpret their data and apply it elsewhere. I have seen some data from South Africa where they looked at deaths and adjusted for age, and it appeared as though they were having lower death rates even at younger age groups. So that was a reassuring sign. And now that the virus is really hitting Europe in particular, it's hitting London in the UK very hard right now, and it's hitting Denmark. We're getting better data from those places now on things like hospitalizations, severity, deaths, and we're going to see in a population that's more similar to ours demographically how this virus behaves. I haven't seen anybody smart in any of those places taking it lightly and assuming that they're going to have a mild illness of just colds. And I think it would be very foolish to do that. We just don't know. And that's especially true if we end up getting a lot of hospitalizations and we end up having a lot of healthcare workers sick, and we end up not having tools like monoclonal antibodies or oral antiviral therapies that would help us get through the wave. So if we get smashed so hard, so fast that we're not prepared, we're more likely to have more deaths. So I think it's premature to write this off as mild. I really hope it ends up being mild. That would be a big difference, and it would be a big win for us. But I think it would be very silly to start from that assumption.
Now, what I kind of find this kind of intriguing. You said something about the data that will be available from places like Denmark, right?
Yeah.
Because in the past, since this pandemic started, we've had great information from all parts of the world that kind of really laid out on how we should be protecting ourselves, right? But the
Mhm.
fact remains, with all that data, we locally didn't follow any of the wise men and what they said there and what they've proven. So, what can we do, or what do you think should be done with all that information? Because is if as a state we don't follow examples, right? It's just like when they put all those dart buoys all over the ocean, because when we got hit with tidal waves, we said we need something to kind of equal the playing field here. So we put the dart buoys, and it had to have we had to have some close calls to say, hey, the thing really works. So now we listen to what the buoys tell us, right? When are we going to start listening to what all of these countries are experiencing right now? Because they got great data, and we don't need sacrifices of life to know what to do. They're giving the information to us. What can be done? I guess that's my
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think we know enough at this point in the pandemic that we have a pretty good sense of what works. And it's not that things don't change. When there's new variants, things do change, right? Like I said a few minutes ago, one of the big things that's different is I've got to retool my therapeutics. The stuff that we were using a couple months ago may not work this time. Um, so we have to be able to adjust as a healthcare system very quickly, and trying to steer an entire healthcare system in a week or two like this, it's like trying to get the QE2 to do a U-turn in the middle of the Atlantic, at full speed. It's not easy to do, and the hospital systems have been relatively responsive compared to the political systems, as you guys know. But the good news is that what the political system needs to do is the same stuff fundamentally that we were doing before. We need to get people vaccinated. We need to get people boosted. We can go through some of the vaccine efficacy data for Omicron specifically. Rapid testing. I mean, this is the same stuff. I feel like a broken record because we talked about this when I was last on the show. Get rapid testing into every house, right? It's still 10 times as expensive in the United States as it is in Europe. To get rapid testing, and we're having to go online and buy them, and people who don't have, disposable income have a hard time getting hold of it. We should be distributing these at the airport for everybody arriving. Ideally, we would set up a real monitored post-arrival testing scheme, and you guys know that's always been my preference. But at a minimum, we should be handing these things out. And we have this idea, well, we're not going to give tests to tourists or something like they're, but it's not for them, it's for us. That's why you give it out, right? You give it out to make our safety better. There's a lot of parochial mindset here that's prevented us from doing some basic things. Just honest messaging, basic honest messaging, that the pandemic isn't over yet. And that we shouldn't be doing things like having, packed indoor bar and club scenes until 2 a.m, where we have, 200 drunk 23-year-olds, packed into a bar in a poorly ventilated space, breathing on each other. This is not good behavior. And I don't understand why it's been so hard for us to have honest conversations about these kinds of things. But that just comes down to messaging. So I think we know what works. I think holding people accountable for doing what works is an entirely different set of questions. And maybe that's more the issue.
Yeah, I don't understand why we're not taking the precautions necessary. We saw the cluster come out of that concerts, two nights worth of concerts, and they're only mentioning that one. We've had several concerts. We've especially on Oahu, but the clubs, the bars, all of these places that the churches that are just very fertile soil for this virus to spread. But there's no mention. I did hear the lieutenant governor on a clip I saw a little while ago from today. His tone is a little different. I sense some fear. I sense some concern, but they're not looking at changing anything to really slow down this virus. And I think, we said almost 2 years ago from Donna Mercado Kim, hope is not a strategy, but it seems like we're relying on hope. We're hoping that the Omicron is not as deadly or as But this is the deal. This is my concern, Doc. Let's say it's half as dangerous as Delta, but let's say we get 4 times or 5 times more of the infection. Just doing the math, right? You're going to end up with a hell of a lot more hospitalizations. You're going to end up with a hell of a lot more death simply because of the numbers. So even if it's a fourth as dangerous, but you end up with 5 or 6 times more cases. you're still on the losing end of the formula, and more people are going to get really sick, and more people are going to die. But there's no that's not in the discussion. It's they're hoping that this ends up being less severe, and we all are, but we just don't know. Should they be concerned about the transmissibility of this virus and how many more cases we're going to have to deal with?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we can't be having super spreader events every night in Honolulu and expect anything good to happen. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's just stupid. They need a at the very minimum. Sorry, at the very minimum, they need to stop having super spreader events every day in Honolulu, right? And they keep saying they're talking to medical experts. I don't know what medical expert they're talking to that's encouraging packed crowds in indoor bars in the middle of the night, because whoever that guy is, I'd like to know who he is so that I could pull him aside and express myself colorfully. I don't know how to put it nicely, but I don't think there's any medical expert that in their right mind advise us doing that as we're going into the steepest curve of a new wave. It just makes no sense at all. So you're absolutely right. Even if the thing is significantly less deadly than other waves have been, if we have a massive tsunami of cases, that's going to overwhelm the healthcare system. So, places that have their act together are not encouraging uncontrolled transmission, and they're not telling their population the pandemic's over and you can do whatever the heck you want and it's party time. What they're saying is they're communicating honestly, and they're saying, we're still in the midst of a dangerous pandemic. We're not out of the woods yet. We have better tools. We're not in the same situation we were in early 2020. We should not lock down. We shouldn't go back to stay-at-home orders and that kind of stuff. We shouldn't close schools again. We should try to keep as many things open as we possibly can. But we do have to control transmission. And I think, the leadership has to understand that it is their responsibility to control transmission, that they will be held accountable, that there's no doctor or epidemiologist or scientist who's going to provide them cover to allow uncontrolled transmission to continue in the state. So I think that's just a very important basic message to get across.
Hey, Doc, real quick. Sorry to interrupt, but I don't want to lose this one. You think it's too late
Too late for what?
to start to implement do we have too much virus already in our state? Too much Omicron? I know it's never too late, but right now, if we were to implement or stop all the super spreader events, if we started testing pre and post travel, how much virus do we even have in our state right now?
We probably have a lot. The test positivity rate's gone up, the numbers have gone up, so we're going to have a wave no matter what. But yeah, if we keep pouring gasoline on the fire, I think that's where you get into the situation that you were discussing, where you end up having such a high number that even if the thing is more mild, you end up overwhelming the system. And again, back to the therapeutic side of things, in a few weeks, we'll probably have a better ability to treat people who be diagnosed early. Right now, I don't have a good tool to offer people who were diagnosed early, especially if it's Omicron, right? So let me just say that again. If you have an Omicron infection and you have a risk factor for ending up in the hospital, or you're not, doing well, and you want to get a monoclonal antibody treatment, we don't have something right now on tap that we can give you. We did for Delta. So, the difference between having the healthcare system be functional and be able to respond and not is huge. And I think, at earlier points in the pandemic, when we've had these big mortality events, it's often been when healthcare has gotten overwhelmed, right? So I think it's not too late to try to control transmission. I've always thought that controlling transmission is part of it. And you've got to hold two things in your hand at the same time. Not everything that happened in early 2020 would be appropriate now. Like a 14-day stay-at-home order, and closing schools and whatnot. But likewise, it's not appropriate just to have 200 people packed into a bar either. That's crazy, right? And who's going to tell the emperor that he's got no clothes on? I guess I will. You got no clothes on. You got to stop doing that, right? We got to stop doing that, and make some semblance of disease control. That is the job of the county and the Department of Health to do those things. So, that's just how I see it. And then all the other things we talked about are ways of sort of maintaining an equilibrium as we get through the period. I think rapid testing, pre-arrival tests, post-arrival tests, monoclonals, antivirals, vaccination, all of these things are part of the solution. But when you have this explosive growth in cases, that's a dangerous situation. I don't know any jurisdiction in the world that's trying to encourage that. But we appear to be encouraging it right now in Honolulu, and that's what worries me.
Well, I think in Hawaii, we got to get a better handle on how we get the information and how we handle that information. Because I think the smallest thing that gives us hope, sometimes some will blow it up so fast that they say, we don't need to do nothing else. We got the answer already, right? And to me that's where things start falling apart. It's like if you get a really bad bleed and you can't stop it, you got no choice. Put on a tourniquet. Goes, oh no, just put enough pressure until you get to the hospital. Well, sorry. What if you don't make it to the hospital? Doesn't matter, right? You're gone. So I think half of the information that we get, I wish, sometimes I always tell myself, and I think about it, and I say, if my brother never passed away from this virus, I don't know how much passion I would have right now, like I do. So I'm telling people out there, I cannot expect you to live what I went through, but I would not want you to go through that because it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable, and that's why I push as hard as I can. Sometimes you get so tired and you get frustrated, but then that's when we got to differentiate between being frustrated but yet being focused on getting the message out. And I think you talked about it earlier. Our administration, for some reason, I hear a lot of talk coming out from the health department, but I don't hear anything boots on the ground. That's what I'm looking for. Because whenever we have problems at the airport, you turn to the health department, nowhere to be found. We got to kind of like figure out the answers ourselves. And is that right? That's a health issue. We provide the enforcement, the security, but when it comes to health, I think we leave that to the experts. And when you call, nobody comes. So those are kind of steps that we got that has to be for the entire island to focus in on. Because that's the only way we're going to be able to stop this thing from moving rapidly, right? If you take away at enough energy, just like a wave, you take away enough energy under the surface of the water, that wave sooner or later will die down. And so by the time it reaches shore, it's not going to be as impactful as it would have been if the energy stayed from way out in the ocean all the way into shore. And I just think that a lot of times I don't know, this administration just misses the boat, I guess. And that's coming from somebody who, I'm not a politician, so it's just a layman's way of looking at things. I think they missed the boat.
Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah. No, I do. The failures in government, not just at the Hawaii level, but at the federal level and all throughout. I mean, it's one of the big themes in my book is what happened to these institutions, and these institutions were once sort of the pride of the Western world. Public health in the United States, and a lot of it arose out of the 1918 pandemic and the aftermath of that. So we have a lot of hollowed out institutions that aren't performing. But I think it's easy to look at the government and say these guys aren't doing their job, but I see a more broad failure than that. With things like the vaccination rate, Oahu did a reasonably good job of getting its vaccination rate up, and that's one thing that I credited the mayor over there for previously. The other counties haven't. They've kind of stalled out. And you can look at government. You can say, okay, government didn't continue to push, but you can also look at the business community. Has the business community really pushed to get all their employees vaccinated? Have churches really pushed to have all their parishioners vaccinated? I keep admitting to the hospital unvaccinated people who are members of big church groups. And this is just a recurring theme, right? So where are the clergy making sure that they're protecting the people who attend their churches? What about labor unions? What have we done to make sure that all labor union members, whether they be public sector or private sector labor union workers, are vaccinated? Why don't we have the leaders of these labor unions every day talking about vaccine rates, right? School leaders. I get emails from various people in education around the state, asking me, is it okay to take masks off for this activity or that activity? You know what I don't get emails about? What their plan is to get all their students vaccinated, what their plan is to make sure that the families of all those students are vaccinated. So there's a more general failure here, and it's easy to point at the politicians, but I think we got to look in the mirror a little bit too. That graph I sent you guys a month ago, which still holds up. Once you get to about 80%, the mortality rate is much lower. Almost very reliably, and a lot of those countries are experiencing big surges in cases, both Delta and Omicron, but their death rate, their 7-day average death rate, is still low. Is it low enough to be really comfortable and to do things like take the masks off? Probably not. You probably want to wait till we have better oral antiviral therapy before you do that. I'd like to see it even 10 times lower, but it's a lot better than it was in 2020 for the countries that have achieved that. And here we are, we're a state, we should have good social cohesion. We should be able to do this. And there's not a single county where I think we have a sufficient vaccination rate. And I don't think that's just government. I think that's failure throughout all of civic society to get that done. And there are some notable exceptions. There are individual school leaders who have stood up and taken real risks to push that issue, and I think are very brave for having done that, because the animosity on the other side is very intense. But that's leadership, right? And I think that's what we need to see all across the board. We should probably talk a little bit about boosting, because the other thing now is that we've got about, I don't know what the rate is now in Hawaii, 20%, 30% of people are boosted. I know it's been going up, but the data for third shots has gotten much stronger with Omicron than it was for previous variants. I was already convinced of the benefit of a third shot for Delta, but that's gotten even stronger. And there are a number of studies. There are a couple of big ones out of the UK, one from the UK Health Security Agency, and the other from Imperial College, that just came out within the last week, where they looked at people who, and this was clinical, they were looking at patients. They looked at people who had 2 shots and various combinations, AstraZeneca 2 shots, Pfizer 2 shots, and the efficacy of vaccination against breakthrough had declined. With Pfizer, I think 2 shots in the UK HSA study, it was down to about 35% once you were 4 months out from 2 shots of Pfizer. This is against Omicron. But then when you get your booster, it goes all the way back up to 75%. And we think that the rates are going to be even higher against severe disease. And there was a very similar number with the Imperial College study. So, what we're seeing is that, at least for the short run, I think the way to get through the next, 4 to 6 months is for everybody to get that third shot. I understand you have to individualize advice. I have some people who just completed their second shot not that long ago, or who were very young and healthy and maybe had a really tough side effect with their second shot and want to hold off on the third shot. Individual circumstances are always relevant here, but I think the vast majority of people should go and get their third shot. And if we could get that number from 20, 30% to like 80%, and we could get the primary series number up above 80%, then we really are looking at a much less deadly situation. And it's going to take time to do that. But this is why I'm so frustrated, because for months now, I've been begging everybody I talk to work on getting this rate higher. And if we had done this 4 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago or 12 weeks ago, we'd be in a much better situation now. And now we're trying to do it in the face of yet another wave, right? So that's obviously not ideal.
So, Doc, shouldn't the state and the Department of Health, shouldn't they be posting the 24 or 26% number? Every day you read the report, their report. So many new cases, and today the state is at 73% totally vaccinated. That's not true, because the efficacy is so low with just the second shot. And Dr. Miskovich talks about this, that if you're not boosted, you're not totally vaccinated. But the state, we go back to talking about messaging, and if that number, you see, when you tell people 73% and we're inching towards 80%, whatever, but it's not accurate, because we know for a fact, especially with Omicron, your efficacy is so much lower with just the second shot. But again, the picture that is being painted is that we're at 73%, 73.6%. I don't know if that's wise. Why don't we just be straight with the people and tell them, hey guys, as far as totally vaccinated, we got to add the third shot or the second shot if you got a J&J.
If you had two Pfizers like 6 months ago, you should assume your protection is about 35-40% at best, right? Based on that UK HSA study. So now it may be higher than that against severe infection, because remember, what determines a breakthrough is often the level of antibodies. So if the level of antibody is dropping, you're more likely to have a breakthrough, but you still have other types of immune responses. So those two shots may be working for you in other ways. They may be working for you in terms of things like T cell response, right? And there was actually a very nice study that came out of the National Institute of Health that showed that the T cell protection against Omicron was actually a lot better. So even though there was a lot of escape, the surface protein, the spike protein had mutated and was creating more vaccine escape, less so for T cells. So there may be other types of protection there, but yes, I totally agree with what you just said. If you had two Pfizer 6 months ago, you're basically in the mid 30s in terms of your protection. So you need that third shot. And honestly, I'm starting to hate the word booster, because there's more. When you say booster, it makes people think, okay, my antibodies are a little low. I need a boost to get my antibody levels back up. But it's actually better than that. There was a really nice paper out of Harvard a couple of weeks ago looking at Omicron specifically, and they looked at people who had the third shot, and they compared it to people who had two shots. But they did something that I liked. They compared it to people who had two shots that had just gotten their second shot, like just a few weeks ago, and they compared it to people who had gotten two shots like 6 months ago, right? Because what they wanted to see was 3 shots really better than 2 if you just had your second shot? And the answer was a definitive yes. The third shot gave not just much higher antibody levels, but it actually gave antibody levels that were more effective against variants, including Omicron. Very interesting. So the antibody response was both bigger, but also qualitatively better, right? And what was happening, they theorized, is that third shot is further training your immune system, that you're getting, memory B cell responses that allow you to develop a variety of different types of antibodies, including against different variants. So I think this is really properly understood as a 3-shot series. And this is something that Fauci's, I think, been saying for a while now. There was a big debate. Is it 2 shots with a booster, or is it really a 3-shot series? And we've had data for quite a while now that people who get 3 shots do better clinically than people who get 2 shots. But there's also some underlying immunology. There's some underlying biology behind that gives me some confidence that it's not just about boosting your antibody level. It's actually giving you a better immune response. So I think it's really a 3-shot series. That's the way I'm thinking about it increasingly. And if you've got some very good reason why you can't get a third shot or want to hold off, well, okay, we can talk about individual circumstances. I do that all the time with patients. So it's not an attempt to bully anybody, but I think you're absolutely right. It should be 3 shots. And if we look at it that way, then we're really underprotected. And that 73% number is very misleading. I've noticed on the Big Island reports that I get, they've begun to break down who's boosted. So I get a little message each day, and it tells me, overall, who's gotten 2 shots, and then how many people have gotten a third shot. And the numbers are terrible. I mean, the vast majority of people, at least here, haven't gotten the third shot, which makes me think that we're quite susceptible, to another wave. It doesn't mean that all those people are going to get severely ill. Like I said, there's other reasons to think that they're better protected than if they hadn't gotten anything, but that they're susceptible to getting infected, absolutely, right? So I want people to get their third shots, and I agree with Scott on that. It's been one of the things that we all agree on.
So
Fourth shot. I mean, if you had your third shot, if you got your booster 6 months ago, which some of these people that got the immunocompromised people were able to get that booster 6 months ago, what happens now?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a data-free zone. I've had patients that are extremely immunosuppressed. Like think about patients that have fairly severe immune compromising conditions like leukemia, or people who are on chemotherapy, or people who are on big league immunosuppressive drugs. And they got their original 2 shots while they were in that situation and had essentially no reaction to the shots. Those people probably should just have the whole series repeated, in my opinion, right? And there actually is a CDC recommendation for 4th shots in those circumstances, but it's not a very aggressive recommendation. It says, okay, give the 3rd shot and then wait 6 months and then give the 4th shot. I have a feeling that that's going to be liberalized, and that some of these people who got their original 2 shots earlier this year while they were extremely immune suppressed, we may just give them additional shots. And this is where something like antibody testing might be useful. One of the CDC recommendations that I think is no longer very helpful is don't check antibody levels on people because we don't have a standard way of interpreting antibody levels. I personally have found it helpful, in part because I've seen the results of antibody testing as part of a research protocol within the Queen's system. So, healthcare workers within Queens, we can have our antibodies tested as part of a research protocol. So we have a sense of what the bell curve is, and we can place people on the bell curve. Is that perfect? No. Do we have an exact validated cutoff? No. But if you were immunocompromised and you had 2 shots and your antibody level is 0, that's kind of relevant information, in my opinion. That's going to change how I think about you. And so I think for some people, 4 shots makes sense. If you're otherwise healthy, I would hold off because we don't really have good data. And there may be different types of vaccines coming out in the near future. We may be talking about what we call polyvalent vaccines, where we use different combinations of different variants in the same shot. Or we may have vaccines that produce more durable immunity, or we may have vaccines that are active against different variants because they target a conserved part of the virus that doesn't mutate as quickly. So there's a lot changing in the vaccine world, and I don't think it makes sense at this point to have people lining up every 3 months to top off their antibody levels. That's not the world I want to live in anyway. I want a better solution than that. But a 3rd shot, we've got great data for that at this point, as far as I'm concerned.
Question. So you said that with these boosters or these vaccination shot, it teaches the body's response, right, to fighting off. Now, is there any? Can you address whether or not in that process, like when you're recharging, not a lithium ion, but a nickel metal hydride, right? You do it so many times, it builds memory where it can't go beyond. It'll max out at 80. You can't get it back to 100%. When you do all these boosting, will your body ever get to that level where, you know, it's just like, man, you've been working us a lot, and it gets to like 75 and we can't do it anymore. The memory can't get above 75. Is that possible?
That's a concern that I think is a real concern. This idea of what they call like an amnestic immune response, that if you just keep giving people shot after shot after shot after shot, at some point you're going to get diminishing returns, right? And you may even create a problem. So I think that's why I'm not telling people just to go get their antibody level checked, and as soon as it drops below such and such, get a booster. I think that would be irresponsible advice. I don't want to be in a mode of thinking about it where it's all about just the antibody level. Because like I said, the real, in my mind, the secret sauce for the 3rd shot that made it much more appealing to me was that the antibody level was a lot higher than the 2nd shot, even immediately after the 2nd shot, which tells me that there was further room to go, right? But also that the quality of the immune response appears to be better after that 3rd shot, that you have a better diversity of antibodies, and that fits with some other basic immunology data. We talked before about hybrid immunity, so people who have a natural infection and then get vaccinated, and now there's also some data on people who get vaccinated and then get a breakthrough infection. So those are people who have hybrid immunity, where essentially the infection is like one of the shots or like the booster shot, right? Those people seem to have really excellent immune responses, right? So it kind of fits with that the 3rd shot would sort of create an equivalency there. But that doesn't mean that 5 shots or 6 shots or 7 shots is going to necessarily be better than 3. We need to investigate that. And it may be that we find out that a different strategy is in order, that we increase the interval between doses, or that we boost with something that's different than an mRNA vaccine or a different type of mRNA vaccine. So I just think we don't know yet. And that's what's being worked out.
I know we get a lot of questions, and we always do when we have doctors on the show. I just want to say, if you have a general question about topics, we'll definitely share the question. But if it's a personal question regarding a personal medical situation, again, as I always say, please check with your primary care physician. I do not want to put Dr. Dwrokin on the spot and give medical advice to a patient he has never seen. I hope you understand. But the general questions, there's one that I just saw. I have no idea what this is. Can you explain how EvuShield works as opposed to a vaccine? I don't know what Evishield is. I probably should know. I
Yeah,
don't
so
know.
this is kind of an exciting new thing. There's it's a monoclonal antibody, and what monoclonal antibodies are is they're sort of lab created antibodies. So what's the best way to organize this? I mentioned at the beginning that one of the treatments that we use for people who are infected early on before they get hospitalized is monoclonal antibodies, and that's based on these studies that were done. That if you give, so let's say I get infected and I'm relatively high risk. I'm 50 years old and I'm diabetic or I'm a little overweight or whatever, and it's like day 2, day 3 of my illness. If you give me a monoclonal antibody early on in the illness, before I'm super sick, the evidence from the monoclonal antibody trials suggests that the risk that I'm going to go on and get hospitalized is a lot lower. And the numbers were in the range of like 70 to 80%, which is really good, right? So one of the big things we did during the Delta wave was we stood up these monoclonal antibody clinics, and people who were high risk, and it was really for high risk people. So if you're like super healthy and fully vaccinated, it's not for you, right? But if you were in a high risk category, overweight, diabetic, heart disease, immunocompromised, anything like that, we would try to get you into the clinic and get you one of these infusions. And what it would do is essentially give you like a super high level of antibodies, right, early on in the course of the illness. And they last a few months. They circulate in the body for a few months. So it knocks down, the virus early on, and it protects you against reinfection for at least a few months. Then it goes away. What it doesn't do is give you your own immune response to the virus. You're basically taking a lab antibody instead of producing your own antibody. So it's not a substitute for vaccination. Vaccination is fundamentally better because it's like teaching the man how to fish instead of giving him a fish, right? The vaccine trains your immune system. Evusheld is a different type of monoclonal, and it's intended to be given before you get exposed to the virus. It's pre-exposure prophylaxis is what we call it. And it's specifically approved for immunocompromised people. So these are people who are not expected to have a good response to vaccination because their immune system is weak. And if we give an infusion of this monoclonal antibody, it lasts at least, they think, up to 6 months. So it lasts longer than some of the other monoclonal antibodies and protects them from getting infected because they've got a high level of circulating antibody. And then presumably you'd have to repeat the infusion every 6 months or so. So this was never intended to be for the majority of people, but it's a really useful type of medicine if you're in a high risk category and you're not expected to do well with vaccination. So I was interested in it because I take care of, that's exactly the patient population I take care of, is immunosuppressed people, people with cancer on chemotherapy, people with autoimmune diseases on immunosuppressive therapy. Very interesting. The big question is, will it work against Omicron? Because Omicron is about to take over the world. And that's where it's a little less clear. The company claims that it does work against Omicron. But when you look at the actual in vitro data, the test tube data, there was a 2-log, i.e. 100-fold reduction in efficacy. So it's not clear that 100-fold reduction in efficacy will still be efficacious. I think we need to see how it plays out in actual humans. And that's dampened my enthusiasm a little bit. But if it does work, even if it only partly works, I think it could be a useful tool. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well? I don't know if I did.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think Dr. Miskovich mentioned that there's some people that cannot. I had a call from a friend of mine last week that has some kidney issues and is on a treatment, much like a cancer treatment, much like a chemo treatment. And he was told by his doctor that the chemotherapy can basically unwind the vaccine response, which I was kind of surprised, but it makes sense that it would basically make the vaccine ineffective.
Yeah.
So there's a waiting period after the treatment before you can get vaccinated.
All these monoclonals are like they're basically a fancy new version of a very old concept. So way back in the day, like 100 years ago, before we had antibiotics, even old school internal medicine doctors would do something called serum therapy, where you take the plasma, the proteinaceous part of the blood from somebody who's recovered from an illness, and you use that person's plasma, you blood type match them, and you use the plasma as a treatment for an infection, or as post-exposure prophylaxis if someone's been exposed, right? So these serum therapies go back 100 years or more. And the monoclonal antibody is just like a cleaner way of doing that. What they're saying is, well, what's the antibody that was in that person's serum that was really effective against that particular organism? And can we just make a purified form of that one antibody and then sell it as a drug? And drug companies love these things because they tend to be they tend to be repeat treatments for people. If you're using it for prophylaxis, like Evusheld would be, probably the people that are on that are very immune suppressed, we need to get doses every 3 to 6 months. This is why vaccination is fundamentally better if you can get vaccinated, because then you're making your own antibodies. You don't need to go buy something, right? But for people who can't, it's a really valid substitute, and it's better than getting blood transfusions all the time, right? So there's a lot of these monoclonal antibodies made, and not just for infectious diseases. We're using them to knock out any molecule that anybody might want to knock out. For any kind of disease process. So it's not just infectious diseases. But with COVID, there have been a whole bunch of these monoclonals that have been made specifically to target COVID. And during the Delta wave, they were very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. The problem was because there were infusions, it was getting people into the damn clinic. And most people were showing up too late who came into the hospital, and people weren't aware of them, or they didn't know how to access them. You have to have a certain level of sophistication to say, oh, I'm day 2, I'm day 3 of my symptoms. I'm going to call the clinic and arrange, or my doctor's going to do it for me. And, as with everything else, COVID, the people who were less plugged into the system got less service. And that really frustrated me. Scott actually did a lot of great work trying to get those out into the community. There's a role for it. I don't think it's a substitute for getting people vaccinated. And just one little thing there. We talked about vaccination before. I know I'm like the vaccine junkie whenever I come on, but there were a couple of big recent studies that came out that kind of confirmed my love of vaccination. And I just wanted to share them because, one of the big things with Omicron has been, oh my God, there's more vaccine escape. And then we're saying, okay, well, with a third shot, we can restore a lot of the efficacy. But if you just zoom out and look at the entire American effort and the Hawaii effort against COVID, one of the few things that we've done really well, and we haven't done it enough because we're not as highly vaccinated as I'd like us to do. But one of the things we did well was develop the vaccines. And there were 2 recent studies that came out on this. One was done by the Commonwealth Fund, and they looked at the Delta wave. They looked at vaccination in the United States of America. And you'll recall when the Delta wave hit, we were already in Hawaii, I think we were at about 60% vaccination. And in the US, we were in the 50s. And they did some projections on what the mortality would have been if we had no vaccine at that time. So if everybody was listening to the Joe Rogan show and didn't get vaccinated or whatever, how many deaths would we have had relative to how many we did have? And they estimated that the vaccines saved 1.1 million lives, 1.1 million lives, and 10.3 million hospitalizations. And during the Delta wave, had nobody been vaccinated, the estimate was that we would have had 20,000 deaths per day. 20,000 deaths per day. You'll remember we capped that at about 4,000 at the worst, 3,000, right? I think that was actually during the winter wave, not during the Delta wave. So you can imagine how deadly that would have been. And that's actually what happened in India, where they had an absolutely massive mortality event because I think they only had about 4% vaccinated when Delta hit. The other study was from I think it was the Kaiser Family Foundation. And what they did was they plotted deaths from different causes during 2020 and 2021. And prior to COVID, the 2 big killers in the United States were heart disease and cancer, right? So they show COVID in relation to those 2. And what you see is during the bad months, COVID is the number 1 killer. And then when the epidemic kind of tapered away, it dropped to like number 3. And then it would come back up. But for some of the worst months during the pandemic, COVID was the number 1 killer in the United States, ahead of heart disease and cancer. And they estimate that 163,000 deaths during that Delta wave from June to November were preventable. So we had, in excess number of deaths of 163,000. So if we had gotten a much higher vaccination rate, we would have had a much, much lower mortality during that period of time. So is this going to change for Omicron? I would be very surprised if it changes for Omicron. We're going to end up seeing exactly the same kind of situation where if you're highly vaccinated, you may have more breakthrough. But the highly vaccinated places, it's going to be correlated with much lower death. So, and we don't need the government to get their act together to figure this out, guys. We just need to get the message out to people. And we need civic society to get the message out to people, to get our rate as high as we can. We should be the highest in the country, as far as I'm concerned, in Hawaii.
Hey Doc, I got this question. Someone, a viewer, wanted you to speak to our kupuna with several comorbidities who are vaccinated and boosted with Pfizer over 3 months ago, and this relates to Omicron.
Yeah. So if you're elderly and you've got a lot of comorbidities and you got your third shot, but it's 3 months ago, I think, yeah, you've done everything right, but you're still susceptible to getting a breakthrough with Omicron. Unfortunately, we have seen some breakthrough with Omicron even after 3 shots. That UK Health Security Agency study that I mentioned at the very beginning, people who got 3 Pfizers, their efficacy against any infection was 75.5%. Actually, wrote it down. That was just one study. So there have been other studies, but that's about the range. It's in the mid to high 70s. If you're a person who's particularly high risk, you may be a little bit lower than that. So what I've been telling people who are especially high risk is, you've protected yourself about as best as we can protect you right now. And you're probably protected against severe disease, but you're not perfectly protected against all infection. So, you should not be at that bar in Honolulu with the 200 drunk 23-year-olds, climbing all over each other. That's not your scene. we got to wait until our transmission's a lot better before you want to go and describe it,
A lot of questions about will this ever end. I think also some comments about the numbers of cases. A couple of things I think that we need to improve in Hawaii, and maybe I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not testing enough. We're not sequencing enough. I mean, I think the number of Omicron, whatever it is, 50 or whatever they reported today, we're not sequencing enough to even make an accurate assessment of what's here. I know in some of the reports I read or stories that I read, some of these jurisdictions are sequencing all. I mean, they're sequencing all positives, not a random selection from each island. No, everything's getting sequenced. I understand resources play a role, but until we get to a point where we're sequencing enough tests, enough of our positive cases, we're never going to get an accurate number of Omicron. But we know the transmissibility. So if we know that the number is significantly higher, is that a correct statement, you think?
Yeah, I think that the variant report from the Department of Health was already a couple of weeks ago. So I don't think that that's up to date. And if you look nationally, the number of Omicron cases increases very, very, very fast. I mean, one of the really intimidating things about this particular variant is just how quickly it takes over. And you just see these extremely explosive growth in cases over a very short period of time. So it'll go from being, just a few percent of your circulating cases to like all of your circulating cases or almost all of your circulating cases, just in a matter of like a week or two. And often that's accompanied by just a very, very, very steep uptick in cases, right? So does that sound familiar? I mean, that's Oahu right now. So we can guess about, whether or not Oahu is experiencing a majority of Omicron cases. My personal opinion is almost certainly at this point, Oahu is well into the Omicron wave. And that doesn't mean that there's no Delta still circulating. We just don't know because the sequencing isn't keeping up with the pace of the virus, right? There's some sort of like poor man's hacks to get around this. And, I was on the phone with the micro guys today, torturing them over a couple of patients, trying to tease out whether or not they might have Omicron. To actually do a full sequence, you can't do that in real clinical time. You got to make decisions in like a few hours, and the sequencing, is not a service that's available quickly to us. But because the spike protein on Omicron is so mutated, sometimes the PCR machines don't pick it up, and they'll pick up the other targets, but they won't pick up the spike target, and they call that a spike target gene failure. So I was trying to figure out whether or not we're seeing that, and I suspect we're seeing. I suspect if we had that data, that would be easier to update on a day-to-day basis. In fact, the UK is doing that. That's where we got the idea from, and they're actually putting it in their real time epidemiology reports. So if the DOH really wanted to get on this, they could just start doing that, and then they don't have to wait for sequencing and everything. If we did that, I'm confident we would see a ton of Omicron. I think it's already here. And the big question is it on the neighbor islands? Probably, but I think we're probably earlier. That explosive rise on Oahu, the club scene, they should rename that club Omicron. I'm confident that that's what's going on over there, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, question. A viewer wants to know your thoughts on vaccinated children visiting with boosted grandparents over the holidays.
I mean, we're going through this in my family too. What's safe? How safe do you want to be? And what's safe enough? And people who are being very responsible are, ironically, often the people who worry the most about this, right? So you've got the triple vaccinated grandparents, and you've got the double vaccinated 5-year-old, and they're the ones worrying about the gathering, and they're probably the lowest risk people because they're the people that have done everything correct all the time. I don't know how to give somebody individual advice. You got to think through your family dynamic. I can tell you what we're doing in my family is we're thinking very hard about the amount of travel that we're willing to do over the holidays, who's going where, how many flights are involved. At one point we were like adding up, okay, if you go to Oahu and then I go to Oahu and the people from Oahu, that's like 7 flights versus if we do it this way, it's like 4 flights. How much exposure are we having in the airport? I think it makes sense to try to minimize the amount of travel and the amount of gathering. But if everybody is fully vaccinated and everybody is wearing a well-fitting mask and everybody can test using rapid antigen tests, I think it's reasonable to try to have some kind of limited gathering. I don't like this idea of like punishing the people who are doing the right thing. It just doesn't sit well with me. And I think there are precautions that you can take that dramatically increase the safety of it. But one of the big things that I've started doing is just making really aggressive use of the rapid testing. So anybody who's going to be hanging out with my family is going to be fully vaccinated and tested, and using good masks, and then I'm just going to not worry about it.
And I think that's the key thing, Doc. And I know we're after 8 o'clock, but I think we bought N95s for the plane. We're going to rapid test like heck. We are going to make sure that we don't expose anybody, even though we may have gotten exposed by somebody at the airport or on the flight. We're here. Obviously, it's just we're not doing this. Not really a vacation that we wanted pre-COVID, but it is what it is. And I think, like you said, we can do things safely. Going to the bar with 200, 300 people, going to a concert, is not responsible. It's just simply not responsible. And I like what you said. The ones that are more anal about being safe are the ones that are the most concerned. But we all can do what we can do to protect others while protecting ourselves. And I think that's kind of the message of the night, guys. We gotta be able to make sure we are not passing this thing or sharing this virus with anybody that we love. It's that simple. It's tough times. It's dangerous, and we got to recognize that.
I agree.
Well, damn, that hour went by way too quick. Guys, don't forget. Let me see if I can find the. Hold on here. I gotta get the caption.
I'm starting to worry it's going to end up being like a multi-volume. It's going to be like Churchillian in length. If this thing goes on forever. But I don't think it's going to go on forever. Just to get back to that point, there's no respiratory pandemic that I'm aware of in history that's gone on forever. So at some point it becomes endemic. But it's not under any obligation to do that at a schedule that's convenient for us. So. I agree with what you just said, Mel. We just got to hang in there, and we got to stick together through the difficult time. And we know what we need to do. This thing isn't brand new, and a lot of the themes that are in that book are still relevant. I mean, it's not fundamentally different.
Like I said, it's a very easy read, guys. It's the guidebook, the roadmap. of what I think our decision makers should be using. Right there, Plague Doctors, Dr. Jonathan Dwrokin. Go to Watermark Publishing. Just Google Watermark Publishing and search out Plague Doctors. Here we go, Plague Doctors, and buy your copy. Get it, read it. It's a great book. It's and again, I think I'm going to send a copy to our governor, lieutenant governor, and some of the
You
key.
trying to get me in trouble?
No, why am I? No, get that out of there. Yeah, why? No, not get you in trouble. I think. I mean, again, this is the roadmap. This is letting people know where we could do better, and we're not. I don't know. It just doesn't seem that way. I think my prediction is that within the next week, you're going to see a change from our state leadership. I think you're going to see as Omicron starts to increase, as the caseloads start to increase. I mean, today was Monday. Our case count, remember, today's count is from Saturday, which is a traditionally low number of cases. It's typically in the double digits, and as you saw today. So the real test comes on Wednesday when we are counting the Monday numbers, and I think it's going to be super high. I don't think our leaders are going to have a choice but to take some change in action or direction.
I would love to come on here and defend them for doing the right thing. I mean, that would just make me
Absolutely.
so happy. And they have done the right thing in moments. That's in the book too. I don't mean to just be down on people for the sake of being down on them. But I think one of the things that I've noticed with the county leadership changes in the last 6 months, and to some extent what's been going on with state, is they've decided that once they had vaccination, they didn't have to manage transmission anymore, that they could just ignore transmission. This is sort of a fundamental shift. And a lot of my book is about how do we control transmission before we had vaccines. But that doesn't mean you just stop trying to control transmission after you have vaccines. We still need to do things to control transmission. I think fundamentally they need to accept that that's still their job, right? And they need to organize themselves accordingly to control transmission. It doesn't mean we have to go back to March of 2020, but we got to do the right things.
All right. Well, Doc, Charles.
Well, it's been a enjoyable evening tonight. A lot of questions. Uh, to our family and friends out there that's been watching tonight, you got to see, if you haven't heard Dr. Dworkin speak before, you got to see firsthand what talent there is on the Big Island, who specializes in what we're talking about, and sees a lot of things through a different set of lens that maybe you or I may be looking at things, because number one, we're not medical doctors like he is, but nevertheless, he has the real world sense with a very easy application for you and I to understand what this is all about. And I can't thank him enough. And I can't thank all of you enough for joining us tonight. So I really appreciate it. Mel?
Thanks, Charlie. Again, Doc, thank you so much, man. It's always a pleasure to have you on. I think our viewers really enjoy hearing, the non-sugar coated version. And again, not trying to scare anybody, but letting people know what's really happening so we can do the right thing. I think the one thing that needs to be done right now is re-implement the pre and post travel testing. I think the pre-travel, we're going to test. We're going to get a PCR test 24 hours before we depart, and then as soon as we land, we're doing the rapids, and then we'll do the PCR probably 3 days after we arrive, and continue to do the rapids. And that has to be done. I mean, I think that's one component. But for everyone else, I think the one thing I would ask everyone to do, if you're going to go visit family, get a rapid test. Get a rapid test. Take the rapid test before you go visit your family. That's how we control spread. That's how we stop spread, or at least slow it down. So anyway, with that, folks, it was great to be back on tonight with Charles and Dr. Dworkin. Christmas coming up, guys. Stay tuned. Pay attention. I'm not sure what we'll have this week. We'll let you guys know. But we appreciate you guys. We love you guys. The village, stay safe. God bless. Doc, keep up the good work, my man.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.